Welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly broadcast in which we interview people about their spiritual lives and how they share that with others. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice here in Newburyport, and I also offer spiritual coaching virtually on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a meditation teacher at North Shore Insight Meditation Center.
Our show is based on the following assumptions. 1, everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we are conscious and active regarding our spirituality, sometimes not. But even when we're not, we still have a spirit.
There are many ways to lift your spirit, not just through formal religious practices, but also through nature, art, human relationships, service to others, just to name a few.
And 3 of the 4 we're going to mention, each person's spiritual path is unique and may change in small or large ways over time.
It's important to respect your own spiritual journey, trusting that one step naturally leads to the next, and also respect the unique spiritual journeys of everyone else, regardless of how different they may be from your own. We're not here to promote the benefits of any particular method, but more just to give you food for thought.
So today we have Steve Misarski, I should say Reverend Steve Misarski, who I have the pleasure of getting to know, working with me at Constellation Hospice as a chaplain. Steve has been a military chaplain. He's had many pulpits, including with a Chinese church. And he runs a very interesting, regionally runs an interesting organization, Barnabas Ministries, which creates support groups for clergy. So look forward to getting into that and other things, Steve. And we always start out with asking our guests to share about their spiritual journey through life, where it started from and how it went from there.
So my spiritual journey. My parents were not, very aware of their spiritual journey. They started from two kind of diverse, especially in those days, religious perspectives. My mother being Protestant, Congregational, and my father Roman Catholic, although his father was Polish National Catholic, so even there was a tension between two forms of Catholicism that were existing among the Eastern European communities in New England. And so my parents, were having a hard time navigating. I'm the firstborn. And so they probably didn't have a whole lot of conversations about their own spirituality. They're just trying to, keep the grandmothers or their mothers satisfied in the midst of that. And later in years, I was able to hear a little more of how that tension was. And but on the Catholic side, there was a lot of just angst and encouragement in that direction, and they just kind of tried to stay out of the middle of that. And so I was baptized in the Navy Chapel in Groton, Connecticut, and Submarine, which was neither Catholic nor, it was Lutheran, sort of kind of like this middle road. We discovered online, of course, that I have a baptismal certificate from a chaplain who was an endorsed Lutheran pastor. And so they just kind of stayed out of the whole religious war there, or whatever, tension, and saw it was an important thing. And but my grandmother, the Congregational side of the family, was more faithful in attending, and so my folks wanted us to have kind of a moral foundation, and so they encouraged us to go to the church. They just dropped us off at the back door and drove away, and picked us up and rewarded us with Dunkin' Donuts afterwards. And so, their plan was give us that foundation, just human care for one another at that point. And if you want to keep going after 8th grade, great. If you don't, that's fine. And my brother chose the latter, and I chose the former. And this was the time of the Jesus People movement of the 70s, and so that had quite an impact on the young people in our Congregational church, and we saw, faith in God, faith in Jesus as something that was impacting, something I think that young people were hungry for. They didn't know. They were filling it with all kinds of things in their life, and they were seeking, and we would collect them. All these kinds of people off the streets and introduce them to our understanding of the Christian faith, and saw them dramatically transformed. However, what was going on, the more established religious forms that were happening upstairs were very nervous about what was going on there. It was a time, as you know, a time of great journeys and searchings, and they, there was that religious form that they really wanted to enforce, and we were seeing more effect in being a little more free with that, and introducing people to a relationship with God without having to have a lot of the trappings that were there. And so it was an exciting time, but it was also a time where parents were afraid their kids were getting involved in cults. So there were many groups that were out there, and words of brainwashing, and so my mentor, my spiritual leader there, was accused of brainwashing at one point, and that became a major issue. And so that season kind of stopped after a while. The kinds of people that we were bringing into the church were not the church-going looking people, and the concern that we were so involved in that was kind of strange. To imagine, teenagers that wanted to spend time in fellowship with one another, and playing their guitars and opening their Bibles and all of that. And so that was a very dynamic time.
I'm curious about that time, because it was certainly a time where there was a lot of experimental drug use of one sort or another. And was that part of this congregation, or was that sort of a separate track with a different demographic?
No, that was we had folks whose pictures were famous. They were on the post office wall, wanted. Some of them were bouncers. Some worked for the syndicate in the area. And some were drug dealers, and some were gang leaders, and
wow.
These are the kinds of folks. Yeah, you wouldn't, there's this guy that used to walk through. He'd have his little stick, and he would come, jaunting into the Sunday school area. He'd come into our room, and they would light up cigarettes, which was kind of weird. It's like, okay, church that allowed smoking, that would be totally inappropriate today, but we were just welcoming all kinds of people. And so there were people that were coming off of bad acid trips, and some of the older members would spend hours at night getting them off of whatever trips they were on. Yeah, it was part of that.
Yeah. So how did you go from that scene to what I introduced you as?
Yeah, well, so things just went awry there, and they shut down really what we were doing, and that just turned me off to a lot of the institutional stuff I saw in the church, because I thought I thought this is the reason we do this, is people were being transformed, and now we just want to go back to a form. And so I walked away from all of that. I turned my back on all of that, got involved in sports and girls and even drugs and all of that. And so there was two sides that were going on. I was still this good kid, but then there was this other side of me, and that was going on at that time. So the good, the clean form of me was going towards Air Force Academy, and the other side was kind of going, yeah, well, I don't think I really want to do that. I don't know. And so I ended up at Wesleyan University in Middletown. In the 70s, it was known as Space City. The previous generations, there was just a lot of drug use, and it was still such like that. And so that was just a new scene, and so I became part of that. Not having getting an appointment to Air Force Academy, I went to the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, where Kent State Day was a holy day of remembrance, that this National Guard killed students on a campus. That was, so imagine, military service was not even a thing at all. And so I was just hiding away, just trying to run away from all of that, and so I found myself still in those two worlds, still interested in spiritual truth and seeking, the stories of the scriptures were fascinating to us, and sometimes, you'd mix the two. You would be, stoned, and then you would talk about the book of Revelation, which is a good text, for imagination and creativity, and then a preacher's kid invited us to a Bible study, and we were interested in doing that, and so we would have Bible study, but 2 hours later we would also host the drug party for the Thursday night, and so I lived this kind of this dichotomy in my life for a while, and then the reputation, they found people that were in a InterVarsity Christian Fellowship group found out that there was this guy that had a Bible study in the fraternity system, and they thought I was this super Christian, and so they came to visit me and invited me into a conference, and I was more interested in girls, and they said, yeah, there's going to be girls at this conference. And so that's just where I was. I was just pushing away all of those calls on my life, and found myself right back in the midst of it, and reconnected that connection with God through Jesus. And lordship of Christ was one of the words they used, just kind of allowing that stuff touch all of your life, where I was just kind of, yeah, I'll read the Bible, but this is where I really have fun. And so it changed, so I was still in the fraternity, but yet I now had this mission, to introduce. So I ended up hosting a Bible study, but without the drug party. And so we had Catholics and Episcopalians and Black Gospel and all kinds of folks that would come to our group, and just at different points in their journey. And we would listen to them. Some were into meditation, and we would just go, okay, that's interesting. And later on found out that it was more of kind of a celebration of discipline. What's his name? Richard Foster, who's a Quaker and Friends, and he was encouraging spiritual disciplines and meditation within a Christian context. And at that point we thought it was really weird, but
just to be, so we don't lose the thread. I'm very interested in whether some of the drug experience that you had informed your Christianity in terms of sort of awakening to a certain depth of experience or touching God or something like that. That Ram Dass famously said, that psychedelic drugs are good as a window, but not as a door. And I'm wondering if there was that sense of the window. And part of why I'm asking that is because the whole cycle has flipped over again, where the value of psychedelic drugs for a spiritual window and also for psychotherapeutic purposes seems to be
Interesting.
It's very much on the ascension at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think I just remember one, moment or whatever in that tension there. I knew there was something real about what had happened when I was in high school, and yet, and so I kind of set up this kind of scenario, lit a candle, and I went into this warm room that we had near us, and said, okay, I'm going to sit here until I experience something. And I sat there, I said, to God, I am going to sit here forever. I'm just going to sit here and wait for it to happen. 15 minutes later, I'm ready to quit. So I think how I can respond to that is that, sometimes the religious is a lot of form and not a lot of experience. And what was coming into my life was a relationship with God, or a form that included a deep experiential piece to it. Jonathan Edwards struggled with that in this area, right? The First Awakening. He had all those forms. He was, right in the middle of all of that, and yet during the awakening, there were these phenomena that he had to make sense of, and probably because they finally fired him and they sent him off to the western parts of Massachusetts, he was able to then reflect on that and how did the spiritual experiences. The first one, of course, happened with his wife. The pastor's wife had these experiences, and he had to make sense of them, and part of that was seeing were there fruit to that, was there transformation of the person in the midst of it. And so that was very much what was happening, and maybe in the Jesus people, because they're coming out of drugs into this experience with God. But then what I was about to approach into was the charismatic renewal was also a piece of it. And so a very big experiential piece to that, and things that we couldn't explain, and so that was part of where I ended up with coming back to my spiritual leader from high school. He was now moving into the charismatic renewal, and so I sought him out and continued that journey with him. And so that I think maybe that perhaps opened me to the fact that there was more than a form and religious form, and that an experience, and the reality is, and a lot of times the Protestant movement has become very cerebral, and so the heart is lost and the mind is emphasized, and so it's a very hard balance sometimes to find that within Christianity, because you have both and they're struggling against each other, and those streams somehow need to come together. And so I ended up in more of a charismatic renewal. It didn't matter what the name was on the door. As a student, I'd come to a deeper relationship with God, on a college campus, and there was no church label. And so I would go and visit to every church that was in Middletown, from one end of Main Street, which, by the way, is the widest Main Street in the United States.
With the diagonal parking.
Yes, and amazing. So from the Congregational church that was doing clowns and balloons to the Roman Catholic church at the other end of town. I'm not being there's actual books you could see about how they were doing. They were doing sacred dance as well, all kinds of art stuff. And then there was the Catholic church, and I went to every church in town.
Wow.
Ended up outside of town in a Pentecostal church. And so God was just navigating us through a lot of different doors, I guess. And so in the midst of that, I found that was a fun. I think my calling was to bring people from all kinds of places, to get on that path, that journey, to realize their path and their journey, and wherever that would lead, So I ended up at Gordon Conwell right here in the North Shore, wanting to figure out the brain part, the mental, the head part of that whole journey, but not letting go of the heart journey as well. And that was a struggle. Honestly, it really was a struggle at one point. I think I was in exhaustion at that time. I had spent 3 months in the Middle East befriending Muslims, trying to understand their faith as well, and walking with them as friends. And so I came back, and the head thing was just, and my spirit was just hungering, and I was like going to walk away from that and find a place that was more of a heart place. And but I hung in there and ended up in the Congregational church. Ironically, things were really turning around in that place, and they were really seeing some transformation, not only young people but older people in that congregation. And so I sought to stay in more of a mainline context for as long as I could, to see renewal in that context. In the midst of that, Western Pennsylvania, and then into Derry, New Hampshire. And but there wasn't a whole lot of money in it, and I had a new young family, and so that's when the military came back around, and an opportunity. There was a Congregational pastor, chaplain, that was trying to replace himself out of retirement. He was retiring, and so he saw this young Congregational pastor, and so signed up for the military. Not because I felt really super called, but because it was a way of doing ministry, and make some money on the side here that would help my family. But it became, I figure I would end up for 6 years in that journey and be done with it, and wake up and 27 years goes by. And a broad experience, because you're ministering to anybody, atheists to Wiccans to everything in between, and Catholics, and it was just a broadening experience. I think that a lot of pastors, whatever their secular calling is don't have that, and that was just part of what I did.
So you were actually enlisted in the Army, is that right?
Yeah, so we call it commissioning if you're an officer.
Yeah, so you actually were an officer.
Received the commission.
You had a rank.
Chaplain.
And you were a chaplain.
Yes, sir.
And so at the beginning, I would assume that you would have wanted a fairly stable life for your family. And the Army and Air Force has a reputation for moving around a lot.
Sure.
Were you able to have that for a while?
Well, I was a reservist. So,
okay.
So there were soldiers that were in our community, and we would commute together, to New Hampshire to serve.
Okay,
and
so this was like
weekend warriors.
Yes,
side
hustle,
side gig.
Side gig. Okay,
yeah.
but you were still
still
Had a
pastoring,
culminating. Okay.
until 2001, and September 11th. For at least our generation, we
Yeah.
remember it. There's
Yes.
generations now that it's just like, what was that? But remembering where I was, and I remember, that day, and this. That was an amazing thing. We were just, as a family, exercising, turned on the TV. We thought it was a commercial, the two towers, and as we're watching it, the second tower gets hit. I immediately get a phone call. We need you to pack up your bags. We didn't know if that was like the beginning of a war or just, the beginning of a beginning. And, but I remember coming back, and there was a recovery center, and just a secular recovery center, a state-run program. And next thing you know, there was a need for spirituality.
Yeah.
People were crying out for it. And the openings were happening in our community to go. And I remember praying with a whole house. We would stand in the middle of the field, and they were just expressing where they were as a person, and and they said, "Chaplain, would you pray with us?" And lots of opportunities happened in those days, and I thought I would spend the rest of my time going and helping families and soldiers prepare for whatever they were going to do. And then the day came when they said, "We want you to go and leave your 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 16-year-old." Who was a senior in high school, valedictorian of his class, and getting ready to go to college, and you're going to miss it, and you're going to go to Iraq, and so that's what I did.
Your unit was called up. I mean, is that basically how it works? I mean,
my unit of 2. I had a chaplain assistant and myself, and we were like the smallest unit in the U.S. Army.
I guess.
And next thing you know, I'm a commander of a unit of 2. And so that was the unit that was, and so they were called detachments, and they were sent out kind of like as free radicals, not in a political sense, but just in chemical sense,
yes.
to be now attached to another unit that didn't have a chaplain. And so I ended up with the 101st Screaming Eagles.
Wow.
On the battlefield. Was never interested in the Band of Brothers, the whole series that happened in those days.
Yeah.
I had no idea what that was about. And next thing you know, I am serving with them. Traveling 700 miles from southern Iraq to northern Iraq to Mosul.
Yeah, well, they are one of the elite fighting forces in the United States, and have been back to those Band of Brothers days.
Right.
And what were the challenges for you being over there with that group in terms of the needs that would come up, and the way that you would respond to those, sort of the burden that you might carry? I think one of the things that is getting more attention, rightfully so, in terms of veterans, is the moral injury. And but you were with people who are actively involved in combat operations, and that it's one thing you're out of the Army and you're trying to make sense of things and heal that moral injury, but people on the battlefield don't have that kind of chance for reflection even.
Right. What comes to mind is one of the rubrics we used was be, know, do. And so the military is saying you must do this, and so, but here you are, that you are a person, and who doesn't want to harm another human being, but that if you don't act, so there's the knowing and the being, and then the rule of engagement. And so I was awakened one morning when there was a a probe or whatever. A person had approached one of the gates and was trying to cross over into the compound, the military compound we had there, and the rule of engagement was shoot to kill, And so here's a soldier who is a human being, asked to kill another human being, and so they said, fire center of mass, shoot to kill, and he didn't. He winged him. The man went down. Of course, he's wearing a very loose. We have no idea if he had a vest on or anything, and so and then he started speaking the words that only words he knew in Arabic to stop. Don't go any further or whatever, and the man got up, and so here it is. What do I do now? Do I wing him again? And
Is that what he did?
So eventually he was killed.
Oh.
And they said, chaplain, go see that person. And so I had to minister to that soldier. And the first thing I said, kind of trying to frame, for good or for bad, I thought, I said, thank you. Because he felt terrible that he had killed another human being. But and I said, there are 10,000 soldiers whose families thank you today, because we don't know what this person was about to do. You did what you were asked to do. I know, tell me, what does that feel like as a human being? And so that's the kinds of conversations that I would engage in, is helping folks, deal with the human part of war and seeing things. And, what would happen is if you had gone through that as a chaplain, if you went through that, then now you are a victim, and you needed, someone to talk to.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would be, ministering to chaplains who had seen some horrendous things, and especially, having a moral compass as they did, perhaps maybe more so, or aware of that more than others, were just torn up inside, and somebody had to be there. And so the division psychiatrist ended up eventually being my roommate.
Wow.
And he also, because where do you go if you're the head psychiatrist in the northern tier, and all the other people are coming with all their trauma and what they've heard, and where does that guy go with his stuff? And I just said, here I am, send me.
And were you getting from him as well?
Yeah, so I was best friends of both of the division psychiatrists in the different iterations. If reservists, we had to stay there. Some of these guys, active duty, would go home, and maybe they'd turn around and come back, but I was there for the duration, and I saw people coming and going, and I was just, okay, the wise old person after a while.
Wow. Well, that must have been really tough to be away from your family.
Yes, it was. It was the most difficult year of my life, but probably the most spiritually rewarding in my life. It's kind of like my life is marked. There's before Iraq and after Iraq, and and the moral injury that I now carry, or maybe God uses that to give me compassion where I didn't have compassion before, with those who are dying, in the hospice system, or going to the end of life. And I've seen enough end of life for a lifetime, thank you, but but they need ministry, and so that was something I learned, I think, that prepared me for whatever the next journey is.
So one of the things that I understand that happens to people in war like that is there's the level of intensity,
Yes.
which you were experiencing certainly, but then you're out of that.
Correct.
So how is it, we do good work, but it's not at that level.
Exactly. So I just recently, I guess I keep this as general as possible, and met at a church meeting that I was preaching and praying with people, and this man came. He was the chief of chaplains of a veterans hospital. So he was also in charge of other chaplains. And but when we were one-on-one, he just shared deeply that he goes, the only place I feel comfortable at home, even right now, is in war. And to know that this man, this chaplain, is, broken himself, and maybe God will use that in him, but there's still some broken pieces there that he needs to sort out and talk, and so I've found found that God uses that in my life, that I'm able to just sit and listen to their story, and I can connect with parts of their story, but realize that even Henry Nouwen, who was a Catholic priest, Yale University and Harvard, talks about the wounded healers, and so that was certainly one of them, but that's why I do what I do with pastors as well, because there's some invisible wounds that they can't even admit to their congregations, their elders, their denominational leaders, that need help, ministry, support, prayer, and so that's what I do with them, whether they've been in war, in real war, or in relational wars or spiritual wars or whatever they get into here. They need support, and so that's what I do. And I'm not a counselor. I don't ever pretend to be a counselor. I've been through things. I think I'm more of a teacher, but I teach people how to ask those questions of each other and to become support groups with each other. And so, I can't be in 6 states and see this movement grow. So I enable pastors to be able to get to that place of safety, so that they can talk about that kinds of struggles that they have, whether it's within the church or on the battlefield or wherever that happened. So they're more able to minister to their congregations and also to each other, and find an affinity with each other. Yeah.
And how is that going?
It's New England is a different place,
Right.
but we started here, doing this here, and New Englanders, as you know, they just tell it like it is, and we have to teach them how to.
Only so much.
Exactly, and then you have to teach them how to ask questions and wait and listen, and so it's been fun. We have about 200 pastors in New England. In groups, and so there's 50 groups. They keep the groups very small, so that they're able to ask their spiritual journey. And that's the first thing we do, is we give them as much time as they have in a session, an hour and a half or whatever. And you have we just sit and ask open-ended questions and let them talk, and that seems to be a real opener for them to feel safe and go, wow, you went through some stuff, and I can connect with a few of those pieces, and now I know that you're not just a competitor, a religious competitor in a community, that you're a colleague, and we can help each other. Yeah.
So they start off facilitated and then facilitate themselves? Or?
Yeah, I train the facilitators. I enable those facilitators to understand, that there's a major listening piece, a major just asking questions and not giving advice. There's a lot of groups out there that are, they have an agenda, and our agenda is pretty loose. We want to see them cooperate and collaborate in the community, but if you don't know each other, you don't trust one another, that's not going to happen. And so we provide that piece for pastors, pastoral leaders, to be able to talk through those things. So we sit down and we train them up and help them understand what this is and what it isn't. It's not a mentoring group. It's not a counseling session. It's a time for them to be supportive of one another, and everybody gets a piece of the floor, to share where they're at, and then they just, they spend time in prayer, and we don't dictate the form of prayer. It could be very liturgical, but it be very charismatic or Pentecostal, or very quiet or very loud, and we try to keep it as broad as possible, and have it express the makeup of the group itself. Yeah.
Wow. So you find much variation from group to group?
Yes. Yeah. So we have Anglicans who are, have that contemplative stream, as well as, the evangelical, and then the spirit, part of that. And they will, do more of the ancient spiritual practices, practicing the hours and those, and confession and those things, versus another very free form where they just ask the Holy Spirit to present pictures and words that they give each other, and pray around those. So it's, it can be very interesting when you mix them together.
Now, you had mentioned, if I understood right, that you were over in the Middle East before
Yes.
the war.
Yes, I was
so
there.
How did that come about?
Well, that was part of Gordon Conwell. They have this overseas missions practicum. It started with two young women who had, one grew up on the mission field in Ecuador, and another one, they were just interested and was connected with Mother Teresa. And so here's this Protestant, seminary, and our first missions trip is I didn't go to India, but Calcutta, India, sitting down with Mother Teresa and all these young nuns and novitiates or whatever, and just ministering to the poor there. And so, we went to Egypt with an open agenda. How could you use us, God? And so we ended up working with Arab Catholic boys who were trying to, their English, the better their English, the more tips they got in the tourist business. So we were enabling them to speak English, learn more of their English. We ministered alongside of the Missionaries of Charity, which is, Mother Teresa's group, there in Cairo, Egypt, and Alexandria. And then the other piece was just to understand the Muslim world. And it was the early years of Mubarak, who was trying to balance all of the forces in the Muslim world with the Muslim Brotherhood wanting to just almost radicalize Islam in Egypt, and he was a moderate, but as well as respecting the church, the Coptic Orthodox Church, the ancient church, and so he was doing this balancing thing. If there was a Muslim Brotherhood guy that was just too radical and violent, throw him in jail, and then he'd throw a Christian in jail, and he was playing the whole politics of balancing the whole power. Just a fascinating world that we now are still in the part of. But 3 months, we had some time in Israel as well. We went to a lot of holy sites there as well, and Haifa with Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i faith as well. And so we just and the Holocaust Museum, or Yad Vashem. So we I walked in Meir Sharim, had the fellow seminary female student, she had to walk behind me, and that was just weird for her and for me. Yeah. But we went to synagogues and, Orthodox and Catholic and, all of these, and experienced all of that.
Wow, what a learning experience.
Journey.
Yeah.
So there are these different chapters, that being one where you're over there, and then you're there as a military chaplain in wartime, and now the Middle East is just in a horrible chaos of suffering. And how do you deal with that, having been there and having a deeper sense of what it's really like than certainly I do, or I think anybody who hasn't been there, because it is a very different culture than ours.
And in about 5 minutes. 'Cause
Oy vey. Oh, wow. I wanted to serve in the Middle East. And the amazing thing is there were other seminary students that I met that were in the same room, that were ready to go and serve and give our lives for the people of North Africa or wherever God would lead us. And we, for some reason, ended up staying here. And the amazing thing is that the Muslim world is here, and there's more of an openness here than they would be if they stayed in their village, and this is all they knew. And their journey became much broader because they've come here. And so, I look at all of this and, the borders and people coming in and all of this, and they're people, and they have needs. And so we have found that what we learned in the Middle East, what I learned in the Middle East, is applicable now in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, in Worcester, Massachusetts, in Revere. Those lessons that we learn, hopefully, to respect people and to listen to their stories and to, see how they've been led along in the midst of it, and now where they go from here is part of that. So, you look at the politics of it and all of that, and you just step away and just say, these are human beings, and now they're here.
Yes.
And how do we serve them? How do we love them? So
it's beautiful.
So there's so many more questions I want to raise, but we're short on time. We always like to end up with asking for our listeners, our viewers, what might lift their spirit.
Yeah, that I knew you were going to probably ask a question like that, and
The title of the program kind of gives it away.
My favorite place is not far from where you, Ted, lived for a while. We were less than a mile from the beach, and my place where I connect with God as I know Him is right there on Preston Beach, sitting on the rock. And if everybody watches this that walks those beaches will see me there journaling and singing and praying and reciting scripture from memory. And that is, so there's so many paths that God has given us to reach Him and to find that. It could be music, it could be art, it could be creation, and those are places, to be aware that it's just not one thing. You're either in or out. There's so many of those, and to be open to those experiences and connect with people of faith and ask the questions and learn. Be learners from one another.
Yeah. Thank you. So it was really great having you here.
It's a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And we hope that you're able to enjoy this program. Past programs are all there on the website, and our future programs. And thank you for being with us today. Bye.